Hey there, welcome to episode 72 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. I'm recording this at 7:30 in the morning, on the morning of March 26, 2025. It's a Wednesday. Must be. It is Quaggling Sand Day. Episode 72, what should this be about? Well, I'll tell you, comedy and comedians. Why not? Seems appropriate. The Quaggling Sand audio program, if you've never heard it before, is an audio essay program of sorts. It's about my own stories, tales, observations, things I've learned along the way, things you might appreciate someday, if not today, as you're listening, maybe in the future, for posterity perhaps. The quaggling sand technical term is one that I coined when I was very young. You probably use the more pedestrian term pins and needles. It's that sensation you get when circulation is returning to maybe your foot, your hand, your arm, your leg, whatever. Maybe you fell asleep on your arm. Maybe you were sitting on your foot. It goes numb. The circulation returns, technically quaggling sand. You can continue to refer to that as pins and needles if you like. The program today, as with every one of them, has some show notes. So hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description that contains those show notes. I will also have several links today for this episode, mostly linking to comedian content. One Wikipedia, one PDF article, four YouTube videos. 3 of them are George Carlin, one of them is Andy Kaufman, and one is about the Wise Guys Arts District downtown Las Vegas location, freestanding comedy club here in Vegas. So let's begin with the summary. Somewhere early on, I became a fan of stand-up comedy and the people who do that, whether they were hosting Saturday Night Live or appearing on a comedy special, maybe a comedy special compilation, or sometimes more over the years, I had an opportunity to attend a stand-up show live, and then I try it out myself from time to time. I'll get more into all that, but basically, since I was, I'm going to say, 14 or 15 years old, and I'll get into that in more detail, though. I've been a fan of stand-up comedy. It's just the way it is. The links for today's episode, the first 3, the usual 3. If you are new, I have or if you haven't listened in a while, perhaps, I've added a third to the shameless self-promotion pair, so bear with me. buymeacoffee.com/danhugo, DANHUGO, one word. buymeacoffee.com/danhugo. You don't have to spend any money at any of these, by the way. Has a profile page. I have links to all of my audio programs. I have some biographical information. I have my favorite coffee beans. Guess where any proceeds do go? Well, they do go towards purchasing coffee or coffee accessories. It's a much cheaper habit than some of the other stuff you can get into here in Vegas. So buymeacoffee.com/danhugo, and the newly added link, buymeacoffee.com/danhugo/posts. POSTS. This is also linked from the buymeacoffee.com/danhugo page at the top of the profile content area, and also at the very top of the web page from your desktop web browser. This is where I publish the exclusively available on buymeacoffee.com, the Buy Me an Update microcast on Mondays. It's a 5 minutes or less, very quick overview of the previous week's audio programming and any announcements or upcoming whatever. So I think we're coming up on episode 19. So it's coming along. Check it out if you like. And finally, Ko-fi or coffee, Ko- or dash if you like, ko-fi.com/danhugo. They only do textual updates as compared to Buy Me a Coffee. So there I post a corresponding update on Mondays and then maybe through the week. So these are just engagement tools. They're frequently used by content creators, open source developers, anyone who would like to engage with an audience or fans or followers or customers or what have you. And I've been using them for years. I don't make any money really of any kind. So it's just engagement tools, not really looking to pay for anything other than coffee. Although if you, I'll leave that there. Anyway, comedian, the Wikipedia page for comedian, it does differentiate, and I think it was the second paragraph. Let me pull that up here real quick. Does differentiate the comedian versus comic difference. Yeah. So, second paragraph. Just I thought, a popular saying often attributed to Ed Wynn 2 words, Ed Wynn, states, a comic says funny things. A comedian says things funny. And the article, the PDF article that links right after that in my links section, goes into that in more detail. But essentially, a comic, and you will sometimes hear the term stand-up comic, he says funny things. And I'm going to venture out there and say that open mic comedy, or in the early stages of a comedian's career, they're probably going to start out as a comic. So they're trying to say things that will make you laugh. So they're trying to put together bits, trying to put together a set. They're going to do their 3 minutes or 5 minutes. Maybe someday they'll get a big shot to go on a TV show like it used to be The Tonight Show, but they'll maybe get some stage time in front of a larger audience, and they'll try to say things that will make you laugh. So they're trying to say funny things. And then eventually they'll find their character, their persona, their presentation. I think this is where, if you've ever seen The Comedian by Jerry Seinfeld, he did a little sort of documentary of his own career development and whatnot. He had some opinions like, oh, any comedian can bomb. Anybody can get up on stage, no matter how famous, no matter how much they know, how many times they've seen you. If you have your TV show or something, you can get up on stage and absolutely bomb, literally. Like everybody goes, what? That's not funny. I think, though, I don't think he really addressed this. A comic, somebody who's just up there doing material, can fail fairly easily. But if Jerry Seinfeld gets on stage, your mindset, you have a kind of a setup in your head of, okay, I know this person. I've sort of preloaded my impression of this person, and they have mannerisms, and they have a certain style, and you've kind of you're what's the word I'm looking for? You are calibrating your sense of humor to what you're going to say. And if you buy a ticket to see a show, or you're tuning into a syndicated copy of the Seinfeld program, you know what you're going to get. And it may or may not be exactly, but you kind of have yourself set up. It's like when you go to McDonald's. You're not going there for something creative. You're going there because it's the same at this McDonald's as it is in the one back home. So if you do, though, read through the next link, which is comedian versus comic, and it's at a website called funnycoach.com. So how can you go wrong? Comedian versus comic.pdf. So sorry about that, but there the same point is made, that a comic is usually, you remember the jokes. The comedian, you remember the comedian. You remember their persona, their presence, their style, all of that. So I think that's interesting. I was once at a barbecue restaurant about a block north of the Wise Guys Comedy Club in the Arts District in downtown Las Vegas, which we'll talk about later. I actually have a link to it here. And the person I was talking to was about to go get some stage time at an open mic. I think it was a Tuesday night in this case. They have bucket nights on Tuesdays sometimes, and then they have the list on Wednesday nights. So I think it was a bucket night. So she said, no, maybe it was a Wednesday. Either way, she said, I'm going to go over and get on stage. And I said, oh, that's cool. We said something about comics, comedians, whatever. She said, no, the difference is. And so she was very attentive to being called a comedian and not a comic. So I think some people probably do focus on the differentiation, but to the casual customer, I think a stand-up comic, stand-up comedian. But I suppose if you're going to be technical, a comic tells jokes, a comedian is funny. I've also heard it said that a comedian, and this might be in that article, I only read the first part, to be honest. I think it's a comedian can usually portray characters. They can act. So they can be comedic actors. They can be serious actors sometimes. So a comedian is a person with a personality and can express that personality in humorous ways, and can sometimes make things that are not necessarily humorous more humorous. A comic, I would suppose, in that context, is much more like they're the comic. So they're going to play a comic in a TV show or as an extra or whatever. They're a comic. So the next links are 3 monologues that were present in the very first episode of Saturday Night Live. Season 1, episode 1, and the infamous George Carlin. So monologue 1 is the opening, monologue 2, monologue 3. Several sort of famous bits in there, including the football versus baseball in the monologue number 1. If you don't know who George Carlin is, we can just stop right here but he was certainly an influence on many people, but just an interesting and very talented person. And there have been countless interviews about him and whatnot. About his development of his comedic styles and whatnot. Really interesting. And he became much more observational and much more angry in his later years. But to this day, people still pull up clips and say, yep, George Carlin was right about this, or whatever. Right about that, this, that, the other thing. Prescient and funny. And for no reason, I have a link to the Andy Kaufman's. I'm pretty sure this was on the Saturday Night Live. I don't know if he did it somewhere else, but the Mighty Mouse, which I think was his first appearance on Saturday Night Live. Andy Kaufman, probably more famous for being on the Taxi program as Latka Grabis, the mechanic. He was a kind of an oddball in that show, but he had a lot of stuff going on as far as characters and weird stuff. And the Jim Carrey movie about Andy Kaufman, totally spacing on the name. I can't say that I was a huge Andy Kaufman fan. He was a little odd for me, but I will say the Mighty Mouse bit was so bizarre and so weird that I wanted to link to it here. That is an example of experimental comedy, and I don't know if he knew how it was going to turn out. It was actually just quirky enough. But if you've never seen it before, you should check it out. Definitely kind of unexpected and weird, but he was an oddball anyway. Man in the Moon? I think that's what it was called. Andy Kaufman. And then finally, the Wise Guys Arts District location in downtown Las Vegas. The Wise Guys chain now. The Wise Guys itself in the Arts District is a standalone comedy club, small venue, not part of a casino, resort, etc. And it recently got a sister location in where is it? It's in the town center, I think it is, by the airport. So it's a little bit more posh. You'll see some of the bigger name comedians doing shows there. Some comedians, I've heard them actually say, that's the kind of club you would actually want to perform at. The Wise Guys in the Arts District gets a little bit of a brush off, I think, from some people. Like, it's down there in the boonies, in the middle of nowhere. But we'll see. Anyway, so I've linked to the Arts District location of the Wise Guys venue, and I believe Wise Guys also has one or two venues in Utah. I've never been to Utah for any length of time, so I'm not totally familiar. I believe they are connected to the Dry Bar, which I did check this one time, so I think that's true, but it's neither here nor there, but I will refer to the Dry Bar later. So, in the beginning, I used to wake up at 4 a.m., do my homework, eat breakfast, and catch a city bus to go to high school. I like to get there early, and just in case the bus was not running correctly, I had some buffer, so I would try to get to the campus before 7. School started at 8, so that meant catching a bus at about 6:15 in the morning so that I could catch the next one if I needed to. So I was really uptight. And so while I was doing my homework, to occupy some of that morning time, I would tape, literally for real, on a VCR, VHS even, Late Night with David Letterman, so that I could watch it before heading out. So every morning I would watch Dave from the night before, or from the morning before. I think it was on at 12:30 in the morning. I was a fan of Saturday Night Live, especially the opening monologue, and over the years, the Weekend Update news segments became typical favorites. Occasionally there would be some good bits in there, but I think everybody agrees the quality of Saturday Night Live has varied substantially. But the monologue, especially if it's a comedian, usually pretty good, at least interesting. And yeah, the news is pretty funny, I think. Whoever they have doing it over the years, it's probably pretty common though. I think they usually do pretty good. I did not dive into details like whether Chevy Chase was really awful or whether Colin Quinn was really funny. I just took them in over the years. I did go back and find the first episode with George Carlin, as I've already mentioned, and the infamous Andy Kaufman Mighty Mouse lip sync bit, as I've already mentioned. Of course, 50 years of hits and misses along the way, so your own mileage may vary, but I think Saturday Night Live is a pretty influential show for anyone who has any interest in comedy. Now, there are people that are into improv or comedic bits. They're into, a lot of the comedy on Saturday Night Live is scripted and rehearsed, but there's a whole mindset of getting up on stage or doing comedy with other comedians and whatnot. So performances versus just standing up and sharing your material. There's something in it for everybody. So I became rather fond of Saturday Night Live. And then in more recent years, I've kind of given up on it. So I just catch the Weekend Update bits. And then depending on who does the opening monologue. But that's about it. I was always interested in seeing comedians in acting roles, whether bit parts or commercials or actual characters in television or movies. While there was ridiculous popularity somewhere in there, there was a time frame when comedians made the jump to their own television series, usually. Seinfeld being the champion of this, probably. I wonder if there was something lost in there as their comedy became mainstream and they became A and B list celebrities and made a lot of money, which made them less likely to show up on stage and do stage shows, especially at smaller venues. I think there's been a return. The pendulum has swung the other way, and you'll often hear comedians say that they do actually like to go to smaller clubs and perform in front of live audiences that they can actually see and actually interact with. So that's probably good. But there was a time in there where I think everything kind of went towards, we can create entire television series about a comedian and their day-to-day whatever. I know comedians over the years have had much to say about that when they're interviewed, when the topic comes up. What do you think about, and especially the good old days, getting called over to the couch on the Tonight Show. These were all milestones that would bring about a response from the peer group and whatnot, from what I understand. So I know today anyone can pretty much kick off a podcast or a similar self-published performance and build from there, which I think is actually better. So there's less gatekeeping and less, how come you get a YouTube show? Well, you can also have a YouTube show. Oh, that's right. So I think it's kind of, I'm not going to say it's leveled the playing field, but I think it's allowed more comedians to present themselves or be found, be visible to more people without having to wonder if Johnny's going to call me over the couch or if I'm going to get to do my 3 minutes or 5 minutes on the star on the stage for Kimmel or for, whatever it is. So a lot less gatekeeping, which I think is good. But I will say also, I saw a comedian named, what was his first name? Bowden? Last name Bowden. I saw him on stage. I'm totally spacing on his name. I should have looked this up. Bowden. That's his last name. Alonzo Bowden. How do I not remember that? I saw Alonzo Bowden live in LA one time. My roommate from college lived in LA. One of his friends is Dwayne Perkins from Brooklyn, also a stand-up comedian. So we went to see Dwayne, but Alonzo was the headliner, I guess. And it was all the comedians that night. I think there was like 8, and all of them were sort of up and coming. So the final 4, I think Dwayne was like number 5 or 6, and then Alonzo was number 8, if it was 8. And he was very dark. I mean, his humor was very like kind of fake angry and like really deep voice, really quiet, making various comments and stuff. So it was really like tense almost. And it was funny. It wasn't bad in any way, but it was funny. When he was on there was a stand-up comedian reality show of sorts, and it was like, what, I'm funnier than you or something? Whatever it was called. He was on that show, and then he started getting, he was on the Tonight Show as a performer on stage and whatnot. His comedy totally changed. He was not the same person. He kind of went mainstream. So that's the example I always have in my head when I think like the difference between the up and coming, kind of figuring out what makes people kind of follow his story on stage and whatnot. You're taking people along on a journey with you. So what works for that? And then the turn that has to be made to say, now you're going to be on TV and you're going to have a larger audience and you don't know who you're going to offend, and you got to keep in mind what the words are, the 7 words, et cetera, censorship. So I think that changed everything. So I think now with more people able to just self-publish, I think it's bringing back some of that, like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, especially when there are clips from actual stage performances that can get republished and so on, which I will talk about later. So the first early days, the first shows that I went to, so the first comedian I saw live was, if I recall correctly, Howie Mandel. I was fascinated with his kind of animation, the way he kind of moved around. He's a little spastic, maybe. Kind of, but for different reasons, but kind of like Why am I totally Robin Williams? Thank you. I was almost going to say Mork. I'm like, wow, Robin Williams. I had become a fan of his work on Saint Elsewhere, which was a hospital drama, and he played a serious character, Dr. Wayne Fiscus. So when he was in Phoenix, we went and saw his show. It was in the Round, and I think it was probably in Tempe, but it was somewhere in the Phoenix area. I can't remember. I think I was in high school or I was in college, but back, maybe my first year in college. Maybe I came back and we saw the show. I know we went and saw MC Hammer also, somewhere in there. But anyway, we had the rubber glove on the face bit where he blows up the thing and it shoots off of his head. He did some Dr. Fiscus humor and various other Howie bits. Overall, it was fun. I enjoyed it. We were sitting way up in the from the stage, up in the nosebleeds. Not quite that far up, but we were a good distance away in the lower priced seats. It was a relatively large venue, so honestly, it was like watching on television. We didn't really get a sense of his close-up magic, if you like. The take-home lesson, try to sit near the stage, which, by the way, is one of the appeals of seeing shows in smaller clubs. You get to be nearer to the stage in general, and you get some sort of a different kind of feel for the person. And again, a comedian is there to be funny in their presentation and their persona and so on. So you're getting to see some of the more subtle aspects of the person and their presentation. And again, also, they're taking you along on a journey. There's going to be a callback or 2 or 10. There's going to be some inside jokes where you kind of have to pick up on what they meant from before. So it's kind of like a callback, but maybe there's a gesture. Maybe there's something that they'll preload you with an idea and then later they'll call it back up. So it's kind of like a callback, but also like, that's what I was talking about. So the closer, the more intimate the venue, I think the easier it is to be a part of all that. So take home lesson, don't bother going to see a show that has like 1,000 people. Oh, you're going to be at the Madison Square Garden? Good for you. I'll watch it on YouTube. So my opinion, yours can vary. There would be some random bits that would pass through in my college time. So a comedian might come through and perform at the Claremont colleges. They were visiting the campus. So it was before comedians started complaining about woke college campus situations and people complaining about the comedy and stuff. And I actually kind of think that's unfortunate that it became kind of overly constrained, but whatever. During the time, the early 90s when I was in college, we had a couple of comedians come through. I don't recall any famous characters stopping through that I saw. We ended up heading to Westwood to see opening weekend movies on big screens, but we didn't really catch comedy live, which is a shame because we were so close to Hollywood and comedic venues. And as I said, we saw Alonzo Bowden, this was many years later, at a club in LA. So we certainly could have checked out more comedy, but we were more into movies. So I'd see more comedians on television, on cable, and that was still key, the HBO comedy specials and all that, and Comedy Central. There were always the challenges to recall movie quotes on the source of the quote, or the source of the quote, so often from comedic movies. So there was still some comedy floating around in college days, but I really didn't, I should have taken more advantage of our proximity to LA, such is life. I moved to Sunnyvale, California in Silicon Valley, 1993, of course. Talked about this before. I was very close to downtown Sunnyvale. I was not very close to downtown Sunnyvale, and no, I was very close to downtown Sunnyvale when I first moved to Sunnyvale, and then I moved a little bit farther away, and then when I moved back to Sunnyvale in 2005, I was very close to, 2005. I was very close to downtown again. So somewhere in there, in the first phase, so I'm going to talk about the second phase, the 2005 to 2013 window. But in the first phase, so I've kind of mixed these up a little bit because I was thinking comedy, not timelines. Okay, all that said, Murphy Avenue had 2 Irish pubs. The Murphy family did found the city after all, and they were Irish. They were from Ireland. One of them was Fibbers. So this is during my second tour of duty in Silicon Valley. Fibbers tried out some comedy on odd nights. It was a Tuesday or Wednesday, I think. There was no elevated stage, so only a dance floor area, about 10 by 10, maybe a little bit bigger, maybe like 10 by 15, and a reasonable sound system for when the pub tried to be a club, or the pub is a club, as they were wont to say. So the comedians, if there was an open mic night, which is what they basically were, open mic nights, were at the same level as the audience, if they were standing or at the bar. So it was not always obvious that you were seeing a comedy show in the bar. And that would always be a problem because, as I would find out eventually, the person that was running the show, I can't remember his name, not Carlos, anyway, whatever his name was, he did not appreciate when people would interrupt the shows, especially his part, the MC. So if you're making noise or whatever, he would get all bent out of shape, and you're like, but this is still a bar. It's not a comedy club. So people don't walk in the door and say, oh, we have to be quiet because there's comedy. They walked in the door and said, we're here because it's an Irish pub and we wanted to come and have a pint of Guinness or something, not be quiet for you and your performance. So it's a little weird, not exactly ideal, but he would always say, oh, if you ever want to get up and, just let me know and you can try it. And I never really I never thought I had material and whatnot. I met a few comedians there though. They were nice. They were go figure. Comedians are nice. He did also MC at the San Jose Improv now and then. So he would slide me some will call tickets, some free passes. And we went to see Godfrey and Mike Birbiglia and some other pretty well-known comics. The San Jose Improv is a pretty high-profile venue. On one occasion, a friend and I got seats at the foot of the stage, not the food of the stage. Who writes this stuff? We were at the foot of the stage. Like literally our table was bumped up against the stage. It was an elevated stage, so the stage is probably 3 or 4 feet off the ground. San Jose Improv is a large venue. There's elevated seating in the back. So there's like the main deck and then the elevated part. I've sat in the elevated part before. That's too far away. So us getting the table by the stage was pretty cool. And so that's more fun. You probably are going to interact with the comedian on the stage. So why not? A rather infamous comedy venue is located walking distance from where I lived in Sunnyvale. This was the second wave. No, first wave? Second wave. No, first wave. Sorry. The first wave. What do you think about this? Yeah, I think it was the first. No, it was the second. I don't remember if I went to Rooster Teeth Feathers during my first tour. I think I did once. But the second tour, because I was spending much more time downtown, since I could walk to downtown in 5 minutes, walking to Rooster Teeth Feathers was maybe another 10 minutes. And I was at Rooster Teeth Feathers, which is a pretty well-known, smaller club. Another typo, sorry. It was previously known as Andy Caps, as in the famous cartoon character, for those of you who are older than 60. Andy Cap, where Nolan Bushnell, famously founder of Atari and then Chuck E. Cheese, on to bigger and better things now. Nolan Bushnell's company installed that was Atari, installed the very first Pong video game at Andy Cap's, which was, it was not broken after a week, but was too full of quarters. That's how popular it was. So as Rooster Teeth Feathers, though, it was easy to wander over there and catch shows. I would wander over there and see like local comedians. They had comedy competitions, and some fairly talented people would go up there and do their thing. I was able to see Rebecca Corey live. I was able to see Ali Wong live. Tommy Johnigan was particularly funny. I think that was a birthday visit to Rooster Teeth, and that was actually right before I moved to Vegas. So we went and saw Tommy Johnigan. I first saw Tommy Johnigan on Letterman. He had some really good material there. I don't know if he's still performing nowadays, but I hope he is. And several others. And since this was a rather established local spot, it was a small, and it was not unreasonable to run into friends or someone else who you would know from around town. This is not so common at the location, the Wise Guys in the Arts District. It's not unheard of, but Sunnyvale had a population of, I think, 30,000, 35,000 at the time. So you're much more likely to run into somebody. In fact, I can't remember the guy's name, but there was a guy who used to, over the summer, when there was I think it was Wednesday night music nights, they would shut down Murphy Avenue downtown. They'd block it off, and they would have a stage, and they'd have live music, and all the stores on the street would have, evening hangout stuff going on. People would bring their chairs and outdoor, blankets and whatnot, so it was a good time. And there was a guy, and I can't remember his first name. It was like Daryl or something. And he was the snake guy, and he had, I'm going to say like 5 or 6 plastic or rubber snakes around his neck. So they were kind of hanging down. So he'd wear overalls and maybe a baseball hat, I think red, and snakes around his neck. So I was at the Rooster Teeth Feathers one time. I cannot remember the comedian who was up there. It was a male comedian. And he said, He was talking to the crowd. He's kind of scanning the crowd, and this is the kind of club where you can actually see the people in the audience, not too dark. And there was the snake guy in the back corner. So as he's kind of talking to the crowd and doing his bits and doing well, he just pauses and goes, "Oh, hell no. Hell no." And everybody kind of looks like, "What's going on?" "Oh, the snake guy." And he's like, "Are those real?" And he said, "No." So he did a whole crowd work bit made up on the spot for the snake guy. So that was fun. And so everybody kind of knew this guy because you'd see him around town. He'd walk around with these snakes. Crazy. Totally fake. No real snakes. No fake snakes were harmed either. So in San Francisco, and this was more in my first tour of duty when I was working at Netscape and whatnot. In the Netscape time frame, I tended to venture up to San Francisco or to the East Bay, Oakland and Berkeley, but really more San Francisco. More of the Netscape people were into the peninsula in San Francisco. So we headed to Cobb's and to the Punchline more than once. I saw David Cross, Laura Keitlinger, Lewis Black, and a few others. I actually had a chance to speak to Lewis Black briefly. He seemed just as uncomfortable in a faux conversation as in just about anything else he does. This was a long time ago. Maybe he's calmed down a little bit, but he just seemed like he was not dialed into his surroundings. Maybe that's just his method. Where I had been to the open mic at Fibbers, and this was more in the second phase, the later time frame, to see some of the up-and-coming comedians at Rooster T and some more well-known comedians also at Rooster T and at the San Jose Improv, I really reached the aha moment seeing David Cross at the Punchline. So that didn't take away from my visits to these other locations throughout my Sunnyvale change in residence and whatnot. But when I first saw it was a David Cross performance at the Punchline. I think that was the first time I literally saw the performance on stage and then could see the exact same show on HBO sometime later. I don't know if it was HBO, but it was a special that he recorded later, so not at that time. But basically the show that we saw was identical to what was in the special. And when we were seeing David Cross, we were sitting too far from the stage to make it anything more than really. We were just seeing him rehearse for his special, so there was no extra bonus for seeing the live performance. So one of the take-homes I took from that was, if you're going to see a live show, try to see a smaller venue and try to see comedians who are up and coming, because if you're going to see these more famous comedians, they're just going to be practicing material for their eventual special. And nowadays, Netflix is kind of taking the reins from HBO, so you're going to see a Netflix special out of them at some point. So hopefully you will catch them either doing their very early material, doing more open mic style, or you can just catch them on Netflix. So I don't mean to sound mean, but I think it's a better experience when you see somebody who's a little bit less dialed into their material. The material is not going to change. You're going to see pretty much a rehearsal. It's a dress rehearsal for the performance. So comparing, for example, David Cross at the Punchline and then seeing Rebecca Corey at Rooster T. Feathers, you're seeing she was a professional comedian, still is. I think she's very into pit bulls, by the way, in a good way. You could see Rebecca Corey performing. You could see Tommy Johnigan performing at Rooster T. Feathers. If you're at the Punchline, you might be seeing a headlining comedian who's preparing to record a special. So they're just up there doing the same bit that they did, or the same set that they did the night before, the week before. It's not going to vary. It's not going to be creative. It's pretty much rehearsal. So take from that what you will. I think the larger shows are less interesting. That's just my opinion. Then I moved to Vegas. You may have heard this before. You would think that more comedians would have shows in Vegas, and they do now and then, but they tend to be expensive and more like Cobb's and the Punchline that I just described if they are well known. If they're touring comedians, they're not going to stop by a venue that holds like 150 people. They want to go for 1,000 or whatever. Not universally true, and some well-known comedians do pass through town, and they do go to the smaller venues, especially the second location for Wise Guys, which is a little bit more posh. Jimmy Kimmel opened a club here, and I do not remember what it's called, but there is a Kimmel show, Kimmel venue possibility, and some of the nicer resorts and some of the more normal resorts have comedy rooms. So there's always a possibility you're going to see somebody that's well known, but that's not always essential. I don't even try for those shows, to be honest. And why would I consider? While I would consider one now and then. For example, Josh Johnson from The Daily Show was in town a few weeks ago for a Friday and Saturday show. The tickets were pretty ridiculous. I think they were north of $50, but they were also sold out, so it wasn't even a consideration. But it was interesting to me that he has caught on. If you've never checked out Josh Johnson, he does highly topical material, which I'm impressed with because it's hard to write so much material about stuff that's happening this week, right? So he does highly topical stuff, but he also kind of became well known. Production by Street. He became well known as part of the Daily Show, which is obviously a news style comedic presentation. So I don't know if he has writers. I don't get the sense that I think it's all his material, but I don't know. But he's very talented, and he does some good stuff. So I was like, oh, I could see, no, not for that much. And nope, it sold out anyway. It would have been fun if he were to show up at something like Wise Guys or a smaller venue. There are many open mic opportunities here, or at least there were over the years. I haven't checked. I think the person I will mention soon, I think he was talking about having some sort of a tool that people are using now to publicize open mic events. Open mic events are really sort of a, hey, would you mind if I host an open mic here in your venue? And then somebody will say, okay. There may be some money involved, but usually it's a draw for customers. So you pick a slow night and you say, we're going to do open mic at this bar or whatever it is. You might run into more experienced local comedians at some of the comedy clubs or at some of the open mics. They'll come over and practice a little bit, some new material and whatnot. So that happens. I like Wise Guys in the Arts District for a few reasons, partially because some of the more famous comics actually do, I said comics, but comedians also, actually have shows there now and then. And so they're well known and they stop through trying out new stuff probably. It's a small venue. It's a freestanding building, which it kind of makes a difference. You're not walking through a casino. You walk right into the club and you're there. So it's cool. You are there for comedy. You're not there like, oh, let's go see comedy. And they do host at least one open mic event each week, typically on Wednesdays. I have only seen 2 professional comedians at Wise Guys so far, as in, oh, I'm going to get a ticket to see that show. I was going to see maybe about 2 other ones at some point, but it's just like, oh, I don't have time that weekend or whatever. But I will go more frequently. I think it's a good, I mean, for $25 or so, maybe 20, 25, it's a pretty good deal. And it is a small venue, so you get to actually see the performer, which is nice. You're pretty much anywhere in the place. You're going to be, less than 50 feet away. And if you get there early, you can sit by the stage, which I have done. I did see Liz Miele there. It was 2 years ago, maybe. And then I saw Tina Fremmel about 6 weeks ago. She's very talented. Tina is definitely going places. I definitely recommend you check out her show. She is an unusual performer, but she makes that work to her advantage. So kudos. It was a great show. I happened to sit right on the stage, like right first row, right. I could lean forward and touch the stage, so I was right there. So at some point she says, "Is anyone in here a nerd?" And since I was at the stage, she said, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I worked at Intel," and that's good. She's like, "Oh, you're a geek." And I said, "Now I would not have used that term. That's not usually the differentiation." But her point was that nerds are playing Dungeons and Dragons and whatnot, and geeks are programmers and engineers and stuff. I don't know if I agree with that, but I wasn't arguing. So then she said, "Oh, can you help me with my computer and some other?" So she had a bit for that. So that was fun. That was a good time. Those are not the kinds of things you're going to run into too much for the bigger comedians who are trying to rehearse for their recording. So she just had the one show. It was fun. I'm glad I had an opportunity to see that. More recently, I've seen some interesting pop-up events here in Vegas, like Don't Tell Comedy, which is you get on like a secret mailing list and they mail out like maybe a week ahead of time who's going to be performing at some secret location. And I think there's another one similar to that, and they're maybe a little bit more experimenting, bringing comedy into other events. Myself, I always wondered if a food truck event, when I was doing the Owners Association here, if a food truck with a stage for some stand-up or maybe a general open mic for music or comedy or whatever would be interesting. I think it still might be worth looking into. This is probably the Vegas area is probably the place to start that, just because there are so many people interested in trying things because it's a weird market here. So that might happen at some point. my own attempts at comedy or being involved in comedy, I've tried open mic comedy 5 times as of this very moment. Twice many years ago when I first moved to Vegas, when I met a programmer named Alex, who was he was talking about and eventually did transition into comedy. So he was a JavaScript programmer. He was going to try helping people to prototype their ideas to come up with what's called a minimally viable product, to talk to, show it to people for funding. Like, hey, here's a demo. It kind of works. So he was into rapid prototyping, JavaScript coding, and so on. And I think he had a partner, and so the two of them were trying to get this going. I met Alex when I was at Atomic Liquors one night. We were having a chat, and he said, "Yeah, I'm thinking about doing some comedy." So he has since become a fairly successful stand-up. He also does presentations and corporate events. He did some Scrum training. He would travel around the world and train people on how to do Scrum as a project management technique. But if you are used to and can make something as boring as talking about Scrum fun and funny, then you will go places. So having the ability to get up in front of a crowd of people and say funny things makes you a comic, I think. But if you can say things funny, no, he could make things that were normally fairly dry. And corporate events, you have to try to come up with material about people you don't know and kind of roast them so that their colleagues will get the inside jokes and so on. So it's, as he has described it, it's not totally easy, but he's pretty good at it. And as long as you need some levity from a Caltech math and software person, which is him, it works. So I've talked to him about this with him. I've talked to him about this, and I have mentioned this in a previous episode about public speaking. That getting up and trying out some sort of open mic music or humor or whatever is a great way to get better at public speaking in general, and he agrees. So I tried this out at his early shows at a bar near UNLV called The Dive. So I met him in the first few months that I was living here. So that was August. No, I moved here in August of 2013. So sometime between August and when I first started working at Intel, maybe. So January, February, March, maybe. So say in the first 6 months, sometime in early 2014, we'll just put it there. And he said, "Hey, I'm going to start getting some comedy going. So I'm going to have this, let's start getting this open mic going if I can find a place." And so after I was doing some work with Intel and I was traveling to hackathons and whatnot, I ran into Alex again, and he said, "Oh, I'm doing it at the Dive," which is literally a dive bar by UNLV. So kind of a hole in the wall, kind of not a place where you would expect to have famous comedians come in, but you never know. You never know. But this was all completely open mic, workout room, trying out your new material. He gave you 5 minutes in a very, very tough room. It was basically all comedians. The entire audience was just waiting for you to be done so they could get their 5 minutes. So not very fun to perform in front of, but very helpful afterwards. So once they had their 5 minutes and they got that out of their system, later they would say, "Oh yeah, that second joke you told was pretty good. You have to, maybe your timing, blah, blah, blah." So they were actually not so bad, but during it was very rough, which is good. That's good. That's how you learn. The next 3 open mic performances that I attempted were at the same Wise Guys I've just talked about in the Arts District downtown. It was the summer of 2022, which I believe I did mention also in the public speaking episode. And that was episode 66, by the way, if you want to scroll back through your podcast subscription to the Quaggling Sand audio program. Not long ago. It was what are we on? 72? So that's only 8 episodes ago. Not bad. No, I'm sorry, 6 episodes ago. So I've talked about this, by the way, in 3 consecutive weeks. I did 3 shows, 3 attempts. So that's kind of rare. They do 3 minutes at Wise Guys. I was on the list for the first 2. So I emailed and I said, "Hey, I'd like to try this. I haven't done open mic in like 10 years. So they put you on the list. The second time I said, "I just did it last week. I'm going to see about doing it again." They put me on the list the second time. The third time I said, "Hey, I just did it again last week." And they did not put me on the list because they need to spread it around. So, and I found out later, of course, they like to see new people getting on the list. And then the people who've done it before, you can come and get on the list if nobody else is available. So you're kind of on a wait list. That's fine. And they reserve some spaces for any professional comedians who want to try out, et cetera, et cetera. So the first 2, I was ready to go. The third one, I wasn't really sure if I was going to be doing it, and I went, and it was pretty bad. The first one was pretty solid, and I think I've talked about this specifically. The third time was a good lesson in being tired and losing focus and not having a great set prepared. But bombing is good. It's part of the learning process. And you do have to remember, and as Jerry Seinfeld said in his comedian special, I think it was The Comedian, any comedian can bomb at any time. So you just don't have your stuff together. You don't have your mood is wrong. The audience is in a different place and so on. So anything's possible. It's good to get that out of your system. So I definitely did not do well compared to my first outing. But that was fine. You're done and you're like, whoo, I'm glad my 3 minutes are up. And of course, everybody afterward, oh, you know what, that first part was funny. But then after that, and I'm like, oh, the first part wasn't even funny. Get out of here. I'm not a practiced comedian ready with a catalog of material. So I had an index card for that first week, and I had less for the second. And then by the third, I was literally changing material around as I was walking up onto the stage. So, which I think I did mention that. So, now I know. Maybe if I were doing it for years at a time, I would have a bunch of stuff ready to go. Oh, I got 10 minutes. Oh yeah, I got 10 minutes. I got 28 minutes if you want, whatever. All that said, I am on the list tonight at Wise Guys. I did use a new email address, in preparation for launching Hugo Floss proper. There's a Hugo Floss email address. So I sent them that, and I will give you a preview, my opening, which I will use again. I wouldn't use this all the time, but my very first time, they said, okay, Dan Hugo. And I get up on stage. Yep. Dan Hugo, just like the boss, except for the fashion sense and the political leanings or political affiliation. So Hugo Floss is another audio program, maybe video also. And it's a program that we used to do post-pandemic or during the pandemic, post-pandemic, just talking about random stuff. So it will kind of be rebooted as something like that. So I figured, I can just use Hugo Floss, the email address, since that doesn't have my full name in it. So good enough. So we'll see. We'll see how tonight goes. The modern era. And by the way, I'm not going to record the show. I don't publish anything about it. I just get up there and try it and see what happens. And I think open mics in general are that way. Open mics are very rough. It's like, hey, I'm trying out a brand new recipe for something. Oh, let's have an entire dining room full of your customers try out this new thing that no one's ever tried before. That's a big risk. And so if you're trying to say something funny and it doesn't work out, you don't want to have a whole room full of people hating you and then spreading that to all their friends. Like, oh, he said the whatever word and it sounded like he said something else. Whatever happens, the less blast radius, the better, I think. Although I've never had that problem, but you never know. You never know how things are going to go. So in the modern era, we're coming to the end. Don't worry. I know this is a long episode. It's been a while. I am not an expert on comedians, the stand-up marketplace, the culture of where it's headed. So what do I know? I will say the use of YouTube or TikTok or Instagram to publish clips of shows, whether in one venue or during a tour or whatever, is actually a really interesting way to get the word out and to discover new comedians. That's how I found Tina Fremmel, by the way. Often the best bits get clipped for such publication, but the other materials usually get also, which has been my experience so far. Whether I go see comedians live or if I discover some new comedian in a reel or a short or whatever, and then you can hunt down, a full, maybe a 12 or a 15 or a 30-minute, 22-minute, I guess, set that they may have published on YouTube. And now that comedians can publish their own stuff like that, it's a great way to catch comedians as they're up and coming. They don't have to wait for Johnny Carson or the equivalent to call them over. They can put their whole show up. They can do whatever they want. So I think that's good, which I will comment on more. There are some clubs like the Dry Bar in Utah, which I think is related to Wise Guys, if I recall. I think I mentioned that earlier. They publish whole entire shows with an audience and everything. Probably with the performance or the permission of the performer. I'm assuming that's part of the arrangement, but you get a really well-produced stand-up performance on a real stage with a real audience in a real venue, and it's pretty good. And I've seen some really, really quite excellent comedians performing in that setup on the Dry Bar. You can look it up on YouTube, Dry Bar, Drybar, Dry Bar. It's in Utah. So the comedy is clean and the glasses are empty. But it's all about putting together a first impression, really. So I think this is a good It's part of the good machinery that's in place now in the modern times. So where Comedy Central used to publish clip shows with themes, these were hosted by Laura Keitlinger, for example, or Mark Maron. That's where I first encountered Mark Maron before he became a famous comedian podcaster. But Laura Keitlinger, she used to do these clip shows. She'd, all the comedy about fast food restaurants. So it'd be a half-hour clip show about bits around fast food restaurants. Okay. Now, it is not difficult to find those entire shows with real audiences or clip shows that the comedian or their agents publish. So they actually make their own or have someone do it for them, or sometimes fan publish clip shows. Maybe they take an existing show and they cut it up, Hasanabi style. And I don't think they're bootlegged. I haven't seen any bootleg comedy shows really. Those still happen, I'm sure. What's his name? Kramer from Seinfeld. There was some video of him going nuts. So those still happen, but that's a good reason to not have phones at open mics. I don't know about the phone in a bag thing. That's a different thing, but anyway, we digress. I think that because comedians get used to thinking fast and to reacting to crowds, kind of sensing the room, they become really good at snappy comebacks or building up conversations in a humorous way so they can keep things light. And yet they're still normal people, so they have actual thoughts and opinions, so they can be serious if they want to. Not always, but the comedians as YouTuber trend has almost certainly made more comedians more visible, and many of them have really caught on. And again, I would never have thought to go see Tina Fremmel if I did not encounter her first on a random Instagram reel that I saw somewhere, and then I saw some YouTube videos, and then she was on some interview shows and whatnot. Oh, okay, she's been around for like 2 years, I think, maybe longer. So yeah, I don't know if I would ever have found this person. So that was a good find. She was very talented. It was a good show. And she was only here that one night. So I was like, oh, she's going to be in Vegas. I'll definitely make my way over for that, which I did. I don't mean, if I can spell correctly, I don't mean Joe Rogan, by the way, of whom I am not a fan. And while some of the people who made it on stage on Kill Tony, for another example, ended up being humorous, they're pretty funny. A lot of them are not, and they're just riding the sort of chaos wave. The whole production, the Kill Tony production, which, by the way, has been in Vegas. They had Skankfest, I think, and so they have been here. And in fact, Alex, who I mentioned earlier, has done some work with them in the comedy universe. He also did not have great, delightful things to say. Not bad-mouthing, but definitely like, it's not necessarily completely random draws from their bucket. It's a lot more produced than it looks like, and so on. So, okay, that's fine. But I'm not a fan of Kill Tony. I was watching it for a while, but I think the comedians who get up and do their thing and they kind of have control over what they're publishing, they can showcase their talent. Or if they are on stage doing a performance and they're able to clip their own show and publish things. Or whoever publishes it. So whatever the scene is now, I think we're getting a pretty good sampling of the people that are out there. I watch comedians online often, and as in my public speaking episode, I think this stage presence is part of why they become pretty good at their other productions and their presence in general. They become good interviews and interviewers. They're quick. They, depending on the style of comedy, they kind of keep track of the news of the day. They can address topical discussion topics. They're current events and so on. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for people who are practiced comedians who can apply that to their other stuff. So finally, I'm gonna just a couple of names. There's a comedian named Bengt Wasbur, BENGTWASBUR. Just type Bengt. He was on Dry Bar. There, if you look on YouTube, you will find a double header. You'll have 2 episodes of Banked smashed into one video. So it's 2 separate performances. He is hilarious. He makes fun of his own name. Like, who came up with Banked? Jenny Tian, she's Australian, but she's Asian, Chinese, I believe. So she has one bit. I know, I look like, what is it? She looks Chinese because she is. So I look like someone who would, I look like someone you would pick up in a bar, but I sound like someone who would start a bar fight. She's from Australia, or she has grown up in Australia. I've probably messed up that joke, but she's very funny. So Jenny Tian, Jenny Tian. And then Kyle Kinane, Kinane. Kyle Kinane has a very unusual style of presentation, but also very funny. Shane Smith, the neck tattoo guy. Shane, Shayne Smith. I think he was also at the Dry Bar. Fern Brady is Scottish. Aisling B is Irish. Rebecca Kohler, Kohler, Canadian. Andrea Jin, Chinese, Jin. Hannah Evanson from Sweden, very funny. Kelsey Cook, I almost saw her at Wise Guys, but I couldn't make it that weekend. Kelsey, Kelsey, Cook, Cook. And there's more. I started writing down comedians that I've come across. So if I see someone performing probably on a YouTube video or something, I'll try to jot their name down. And if they happen to be in Vegas, I'll try to check them out. Anna Ancana, if I'm saying her name correctly, I don't know if she'll be in Vegas. She is super talented. She has a live show that she's touring, so if she comes to Vegas, I'll definitely try to check that out if I can. And so on and so on. So I think, especially comedians who write their own material, they're usually pretty smart and pretty good. Definitely worth checking out. And so, if I have a list of things that are good about living in Vegas, one of them is access to comedy resources. With the caveats I've expressed, but generally speaking, it's an interesting place for comedy. It's not quite LA or New York, but few things are Vegas, for better and better. So that's where I'm going to leave it. Try to get out and support local comedy if you can, or get up on stage and try some open mic. I highly recommend it. And I will assume that you are wishing me well for my 3 minutes tonight on stage at Wise Guys. I'm sure you didn't miss much, but next time, if you're in town, come by. Take it easy. Bye-bye.